All right, so I just watched Dark Side of the Ring, the episode on the Road Warriors, and the interesting thing with Dark Side of the Ring is it didn't tell me a whole lot I didn't already know. There have been exposés on Hawk, um, Mike being his real first name and all. There have been talks about him before, and I remember the angles, the very regrettable angle. Um, when they brought in Darren Drozdov to be their tag partner, and he was puke. It's silly, ridiculous. Just he make himself throw up. That's a great angle. That's an awesome gimmick. It didn't work, and it always felt to me like Drozdov was brought in because they didn't trust Hawk to do the working. They didn't trust him to stop drinking, and then they made his drinking an angle, which was painful. And as fans, we hated it. We really didn't like it. So when they did the spot with him being pushed off the Titantron, that was reviled. That was reviled by fans who were like, "What are they doing?" And I know they were in essence probably building to a reunion of the Road Warriors and turning Draw's heel, but it was a terrible idea. And it's not the first time or the last time that WWE's had terrible ideas. Jake the Snake is a for instance, he's in a match against Jerry Lawler. And Lawler's talking about him being a lousy drunk, which he was a drinker, and he's actually pouring alcohol down his throat during a match where Jake had been sober for a long time. So WWE's insensitivity, it's funny because we talk about some of the angles they do now and some of the controversy in them and how some of them might be tone deaf. Compared to what they used to do, it's nothing. Compared to what they used to do is nothing at all. I can't imagine them doing what they did with Hawk ever. Again, I just can't see it. The interesting thing was, and the reason why there's these names on the board is because I was thinking about this, and this is probably the golden age of wrestling. I think we can qualify it as that now, the golden age, the 80s and 90s, when these wrestlers were all bigger than life. And so they're talking about all this, and I'm thinking it over in my head. And I don't have Stone Cold, The Rock, and some of the other big names up here too. I could have kept going, but there's some names I wanted to put on the board because as a wrestling fan, they're important. Now the Road Warriors, the most intimidating tag team of all time, and I remember watching. I would stay up to watch World Championship Wrestling on TBS. I would stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning to watch World Championship Wrestling, and I would stay up, and the Mulkey brothers or whoever would be in the ring, and they'd be like hanging out. There wouldn't be any entrance for them. And then you'd hear Iron Man, which was their song at the time, the old Black Sabbath song Iron Man, and it would play, and out come Road Warrior and Hawk, and then they would take these two pasty-faced dudes and they'd slap them into the ring, and in about 25 seconds the match would be over, and then they'd leave. And that was it. And you know what? It was fantastic. And so what it did was it built them up and it built them up and it built them up to the point where you really wanted to see what could happen with them. Now, they mention in the dark side of the ring, they talk about the battle between them and the Koloffs, which brings me to Nikita Koloff. Nikita Koloff was one of the most fantastic specimens. You want to talk about Goldberg before Goldberg, it was Nikita Koloff. Nikita Koloff was a very well put together wrestler who, for whatever reason, it never ended up in WWE, and it's too bad because I think Nikita Koloff could have been something more than what he was because he had that run there, and yeah, so they showed him, and I thought, well, who would be the equivalent to Nikita Koloff now? Rusev comes to mind. Now Rusev is Bulgarian, but at points during the WWE run, they made it pretty clear that he was Russian in his mindset, and it was weird because Bulgaria and Russia aren't the same, but again, that's fine, right? And then the thought that I had watching Road Warriors is, so who are the current Road Warriors? What tag team would I look at right now and say, that's your current Road Warriors? Not the Revival. The Revival is your Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, not New Day. New Day's way too nice and friendly and fun. They remind me more of like the Killer Bees, except they actually won the titles. Killer Bees never won the titles. Maybe the British Bulldogs might be comparable to New Day, but again, I don't know how accurate I'd go with that. It's tough to think of any tag team that you would put up there and say, well, they're like the Road Warriors. Closest I could come was maybe the Usos when they were heel, but still, I can't think of a tag team. And I think part of it is the way that tag team wrestling is treated. So one thing I'm hoping with AEW is that tag team wrestling starts getting treated more seriously, where a wrestler isn't just in a tag team because they're a failed singles wrestler. Wrestler's not just in a tag team because creative doesn't know what to do with you right now. You're not just in a tag team because in reality your tag partner's the guy you're going to have a feud with, but they're delaying it. I want that storyline to be gone, and I'd like to see a return to some sort of tag team wrestling, which is why the Revival comes to mind. And yet, they're not obviously physically what the Road Warriors were. You don't have a tag team that, in my eyes, can compete with that. They did talk about how there were wrestling teams that were knockoffs. It was interesting. I thought that they had Barry Darsow in that as well, because Demolition was WWE's answer to the Road Warriors. Absolutely, Demolition Road Warriors. That was absolutely what they were meant to be. WWF saw what Road Warriors were doing, and they thought, well, we got to get our own Road Warriors. At least that's how it looked to those of us as fans at the time. And then you had Warlord and Barbarian, the Powers of Pain, who were a pale imitation of the Road Warriors. And yet both wrestlers on their own were good, but together there wasn't like that magic that you had. And of course they mentioned I believe it was the Blade Runners, was Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, as they've been known. And it started out he was the Dingo Warrior earlier in his career. Not many people would know he was the Dingo Warrior. That's what I thought of him. And then Ultimate Warrior, and of course when the Road Warriors joined the company, like, well, you got to change it to Legion of Doom. They're the Road Warriors. I never called them the Legion of Doom. They referred to themselves as Legion of Doom in World Championship Wrestling, though. So when it went from Road Warriors to Legion of Doom, it wasn't really that much of a stretch, because we'd already heard them refer to themselves as the Legion of Doom. So it wasn't really a big deal. But again, I can't think of a tag team in pro wrestling right now that when their music hits, that you go, okay, something big's going to happen. Something great's going to happen right now. And they come out and they do their damage and they leave. Maybe part of it is because we don't have jobbers like we did back then. Maybe part of it is that because we know the industry, we know the business, the idea of guys coming out and destroying people in 3 or 4 seconds doesn't really interest us anymore. But it's too bad, because they had a presence that translated in Japan, as said in that Dark Side of the Ring, translated in WCW, translated everywhere. And WCW, which was, NWA, they were in the AWA as well. And they could work as bad guys, they could work as good guys, and it didn't matter. But again, as I'm watching this, I was also thinking about other wrestlers, like Undertaker. Who right now in WWE or any company would you look at and say could be an Undertaker type wrestler? Bray Wyatt comes to mind. But Bray Wyatt, has he already taken too many defeats, and is the Fiend character already... Because we know who Bray Wyatt is, does the Fiend not... It's not like the Undertaker came in as Mark Calloway or Don Callis and came in as some character that emerged... Not Don Callis. Mean Mark Callis? Don Callis is a completely different guy altogether. I'm trying to think now. I mean, I know he's had other names, but if he came in as one character and he became Taker, and yet at the same time we know that Kane had other characters, but at the same time when he came out as dressed as Kane, we didn't really recognize him as Isaac Yankem DDS, right? So, and again, with what we know on the internet now, would we have bought Kane? Would Kane have got over if we'd gone, it's just the evil dentist, right? So... with Undertaker, I don't know that you can create another Undertaker, and I don't know that you can do it with Bray Wyatt, who started as Bray Wyatt, and now you have the Fiend character in there as well, and you've got the Firefly Funhouse. Or maybe you don't need to create another Undertaker, but Bray Wyatt, to me, kind of feels more like a Mick Foley, where Mick Foley had, he had the 3 faces of Foley, and it feels like with Bray Wyatt you have that. You have the character from Cape Fear that he's taken on. You have the Firefly Funhouse Bray Wyatt, and then you have the Fiend. And he could pretty much split between the 3. So maybe there isn't anybody that you could look at and say could be the next Undertaker. And maybe that's part of the issue wrestling has. Because I'm thinking about what makes this the golden age compared to where we are right now. So Shawn Michaels comes to mind. Shawn Michaels, of course, started out as a tag wrestler and emerged as a star in his own right and became a massive superstar. Dolph Ziggler's the closest I can find, and I know that comparison gets made a lot, and there's a reason. Dolph Ziggler started out as part of the cheerleader group, not going to be taken entirely seriously, and definitely wasn't. And yet, Dolph Ziggler is an excellent wrestler. He's had his shots at a run. And depending on who you ask, either Dolph Ziggler can't carry the title and can't carry a company, or he hasn't been given a real opportunity to do so. But either way, Ziggler does not measure up to the Shawn Michaels level. But if Shawn Michaels had come along now, would he have been the big star that he became? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Now, WCW is what we had back then as an alternate for WWF wrestlers. And now we have the AEW as the other alternative. And it is important to have an alternative. And I think that will drive creative decisions to greater heights. I think that will cause the entire product to be better across both. So I think by having two different companies competing for that same audience, I think you have a way to grow that audience. And I think it's a matter of trying to draw people back. There are a lot of people who watch wrestling with these guys who will not watch wrestling with these guys. So you need to kind of find a way to sell them on the stars of now. Now, AEW has done a good job of building up Brody Lee. Brody Lee may be their answer to The Undertaker. They've done a good job of building up Lance Archer. He's not a Russian character, but Lance Archer could very well have that Nikita Koloff kind of uh, um, um, persona, as in he's intimidating. Again, the tag team? I don't know with the tag team. I don't know with the tag team. That's the trick. I could make a comparison of the Rockers, who were the Midnight Rockers in AWA. Am I right? I'm right. I know I'm right because they were the Midnight Rockers. They were great heels, and then they went to the WWE and became just known as the Rockers. And I was like, really? They're lame now. Which was like the Sheep Herders becoming the Bushwhackers, and that was lame as hell. Still lame as hell. And again, by today's standards, that gimmick wouldn't have got over because fans, internet smart fans, would have rebelled against that. They would have hated it. They would have booed that. You know, the sheep herders were fantastic heels, and then they go to WWE and they're just the bushwhackers. So again, watching these Dark Side of the Ring things, I remember all this stuff, and again, I'm just it's just a refresher for me. Because there was definitely dirt rags back then too. It's just instead of it being the internet, you'd go and buy your Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, which had a lot of kayfabe news where it's in character, but it also had some of the out of character stuff too, where they would get into what some of these guys were doing that they shouldn't have been doing. Now, here's the big one, Ric Flair. So who would be the Ric Flair of wrestling right now? The closest I can come is Jericho. Now, here's the reason I went with Jericho. Flair was dominant in NWA, goes over to WWF, goes back to NWA, ends up back in WWE when they get bought out. Jericho leaves WWE, goes to AEW, he's been champion in both. I could see Jericho at the end of this run in AEW being welcomed back in WWE for one last run before he retires. I think that a lot of the perceived hatred between the AEW and WWE, I think it's just a matter of the products being different, and this is a battle that's being waged. But I think Vince McMahon, as a businessman, if Chris Jericho's contract were to run out, I think as a businessman he'd say, you know what, it's in my best interest to go and get Jericho back and bring Jericho back into the fold and just treat it like with TNA that career he had in AEW never happened. So when a wrestler leaves WWE, goes to TNA and comes back, I know it's Impact now, but it was TNA for years. But when they would leave and go to TNA and come back, WWE just acted like they were retired while they were gone. Kurt Angle was a good example of that. Jeff Hardy was another one. Oh, he's been in the darkness. No, he's been in TNA or Impact, whatever you want to call it. He's been in it, and he was there for a while, and he had some good matches. And then, of course, the thing with Sting happened. But I don't know that we have an actual Ric Flair level wrestler anymore. I don't know that we have that. I don't know that we have somebody who could win a title as much as Ric Flair won it, who can. He made stars. Ric Flair he made Sting. And when Ricky Steamboat had the feuds that he had with Flair, like, he made Steamboat look great. Now, Rick Steamboat was one of the greatest wrestlers ever, probably my favorite wrestler ever, up there with Bret Hart. But Flair knew how to make you look like an absolute megastar, and I think Jericho does that too. the Scorpio Sky comes to mind as a guy that, recently Jericho's made look good. Darby Allin. He made Darby Allin look like an absolute megastar. And Darby Allin could end up being like a Shawn Michaels type for AEW. He's small. I understand he's got the smaller physique. But I really think you can make Darby Allin their Shawn Michaels level superstar. I think you could get those kinds of pops for him when he comes out. I think that's already been shown with Darby Allin in AEW. Now, I have Jake Roberts up here because Jake the Snake was, in my eyes, and still to this day, the greatest heel with his promos that ever existed. He talked slow. He spoke quiet. And he really genuinely was frightening. And really the fact that he didn't raise his voice and he didn't yell and scream and he didn't go crazy made you more scared of him. I don't know of a wrestler in WWE or AEW that I would put in that category. Again, you could kind of go with Bray Wyatt at times, that he's been kind of quiet, but again, Bray Wyatt's already on here as like maybe the Undertaker / Mick Foley type. So do you put him in the Jake Roberts category as well? And having a really smart heel like that is tough right now too. Because if your heel is really smart and really good, fans will cheer for him. Fans will love him, and now it's all backfired. You spent all this time creating a heel, and the fans respond by cheering him and wanting him to win. This is what happened with The Fiend. The Fiend was supposed to be the ultimate bad guy, and the fans ruined it by all cheering him on and booing Seth Rollins, and it just blew up all the programming, and I don't know how you save it after that. I don't know how you save it. Now, people could say, well, it was booked badly, and you're right. That was booked badly, but Jake Roberts knew how to get fans to hate him. He really did. He knew how to get fans to hate him, and he was really good at it. Jericho's good at it. I guess you could put Kevin Owens somewhat, but I don't know that KO hasn't been wrecked by the feud he had with Shane McMahon that went on way too long, and he came out of it kind of looking like a chump. So I'm not sure that you have a villain in wrestling. And you look at Jake Roberts right now in AEW and the promos he's doing to get Lance Archer over, and it proves he's still got it. Even if you don't understand what he's saying, he could read the ingredients off of the back of a mac and cheese box, and by the time he's done, you're pretty sure you're going to die. So, and that he's going to be the one to off you. He's got this presence, and I'm not sure that there's anybody who has that. And I'm going to explain at the end where I think there's a problem with wrestling right now. So Hulk Hogan was the ultimate big superhero. Everybody loved Hogan except this guy. I hated Hulk Hogan. I couldn't stand Hulk Hogan. I absolutely, even as a little kid, I hated his music when playing. I'm like, oh, not Hogan again. And I'd be like, oh, please let it be Savage. Please let it be Steamboat. Oh, it's Hogan. Oh, why is Hogan making the save? You hear the crowd chanting, Hogan, Hogan. And you're like, no, please. Oh, God, it's Hulk. Of course it's Hulk. I was the only one that cheered when Paul Orndorff turned his back on him, too. Like, I loved Mr. Wonderful. And I was like, oh, good. Kick him, punch him, kick him. And then, of course, Hogan beat him. Roman Reigns is the closest you can get. Now, here's the interesting thing. The way that they try to make Roman Reigns happen is not entirely different than the way Hulk Hogan originally happened. Where Bob Backlund loses the title to the Sheik. The Sheik's a transitional champion to Hulk Hogan. I would never tell Sheik that to his face. And Roman Reigns is kind of that same thing, where Roman Reigns was supposed to be taking over. He was supposed to be the big face. But because fans now are smarter than they were 30 years ago, we reject it. And I sometimes wonder if maybe it's fans that cause a lot of this uncertainty, where Hulk Hogan was this massive star here, that if you took Hulk Hogan exactly as he was in the 80s, you plunked him into modern day wrestling, and you have him come up and win the title that way, I think fans would hate it. I think fans would hate it. I think fans would turn on him. I think there'd be a lot of Hulk Hogan sucks. There'd be a lot of Hogan can't wrestle chants going on. Because let's be honest, Hogan, if you look over Hogan's career, I can't remember a 5-star match. Even the Andre match. Everybody loves the Andre match. I thought the Andre match was boring while it was happening. I remember watching and thinking, well, it's here. It's okay. But I mean, the feud was more interesting than the match. The feud between Andre and Hogan was more interesting than the match. And yes, I was cheering for Andre the Giant. When Andre tore his shirt off and he's all in you Hogan, and he's right in his face, I was like, you tell him, Andre, that's right. That's right, Bobby Heenan. You tell him. That's right. He didn't give him a title shot, and he should have, because that's Andre the Giant. He's right, and he needs respect. And the fans are all booing him while I'm going, he's right. He's got it. So we had the golden age here in the 80s and the 2000s, and the 80s and 90s, I should say, into the early 2000s. And now we're into this no man's land where I'm not sure that you can recreate any of this. Even AEW, and I love AEW, I think it's a great product. I think Britt Baker is the best heel women's wrestler I've seen. Period. Now, Alexa Bliss is up there. I think when Alexa's a heel, I think she could be fantastic. But Britt Baker, fantastic heel. I just don't know that I could put her up and say, oh, she could be just as unpopular as Trish was when she was a heel. Trish Stratus, for all of the love that everybody gives her right now, Trish worked best as a heel. Trish was best when she was bad. And when everybody didn't like her, that's when she did her best work. And I don't know that I could put Britt in that category, and that's the only one I can really think of. I know Bayley's done well on SmackDown. I know Charlotte's had her moments as well. I don't know that you can have that. And I do wonder if... So if we look at the way it's booked, the Road Warriors almost never lost. Definitely didn't lose clean. Nikita Koloff, he was in a lot of bloody matches, a lot of chain matches, a lot of nasty matches. So if he did lose, he still looked like $1 million. Undertaker, yeah, he didn't lose. Shawn Michaels, not really. WCW, the way they booked it was their megastars were their megastars. And of course, there are drawbacks of that because their mid-card defected to WWF, became main eventers to WWF. And it was a big part of the reason WCW fell apart. They were pushing the wrong guys. Ric Flair lost, but he always looked like a champion while he lost. And that's not easy. It is not easy to lose matches and still look like you're the man. And Flair did it. Jake Roberts, he lost here and there. Jake Roberts, I always thought was interesting was that he was seen as the gatekeeper, that in order to get to Hulk Hogan, you had to go through Jake the Snake. So Jake the Snake was preparing guys for that feud with Hogan. They would go past Jake and get to Hogan. But Jake always looked like a threat too. Hogan obviously almost never lost. He didn't lose clean. That wasn't a thing. And now over on this side, you've got Rusev, who lost a lot. Bray Wyatt, who does lose regularly. And whether you like or don't like how he loses, he does lose regularly, and he has throughout. Dolph Ziggler, there's been job squad times for Dolph Ziggler. AEW, the way they're booking, I think has been pretty smart. The only concern I have is the amount of a push that everybody coming out of WWE and over to AEW seems to get. I would be worried if that continues. It's been good so far. Like Brody Lee, I don't qualify Lance Archer really as a WWF guy because he's been out of it for so long that there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't realize he had been in WWF/WWE. Jericho. I do get concerned that maybe they're going to end up pushing a bunch of WWE guys, and the problem with that is, if you have whoever's been brought in from the bigger company come in and squash your talent, you're basically telling the rest of the world and the internet, our talent isn't actually as good as we've been popping it up to be. So when guys leave the other company and come over here, they're just going to run it over, and that was a problem WCW had, where the guys who'd been there for a long time didn't get their due, and the new guys that just had come in because they came from the bigger company, they got the big push. So I really hope AEW doesn't undo the good things that they've done already with the stars they've been creating, because they have created stars. Jericho, he's almost undefeated in AEW. One thing with Jericho was he was at times in WWE kind of treated like a jobber. And I don't know that Jericho ever really had... I mean, obviously there was the point where Triple H offed his title run because Triple H didn't believe in him. But he did have a pretty good run after that. He did. And then, of course, there was the Jericho Show where it's Jericho and Big Show, and that was a great team and then a feud. Again, I don't know who else I'd put in there. I mean, you could say John Cena, but Cena's career is basically finished, right? So Cena doesn't really... And Cena's more of a Hogan than a Flair, because Cena's been the good guy and he very rarely, if ever, lost. Jake Roberts, again, I don't know who I would qualify as being a Jake Roberts. And with Hulk Hogan, to me, it's obvious it would be Roman Reigns. And you can't have Seth Rollins in there because Rollins has fluctuated between heel and face too many times. I think when I watch these shows, it to me reveals that wrestling as an entity has an issue with being able to create the bigger than life stars when we know who these guys are on their way out. We know through the internet their real names. We know through Instagram and Twitter and Facebook about whether or not they got wives and kids and all these other things. Stuff we didn't really know back in the 80s or really care about a whole lot. And so I don't know that you can ever recreate that. Because I see a lot of comparisons like, oh, well, wrestling today isn't, it's not what it was. Can't be. I don't think it can ever get back there. Kayfabe, which is your in-character wrestling, has been dead for years. It's been dead for ages. I don't know that you can get it back. So I'd be interested to know from people who have been watching the Dark Side of the Ring series. And again, I watched the Road Warriors one. I haven't watched the other ones yet from this season. But, you know, in general, is there a way to get back to another golden age of wrestling, or do we just give up on it? And what drives me nuts with wrestling right now is, and it's something they did, you know, last week, they were criticized for this, showing AJ Styles being a really nice guy, and then in the segment that followed that commercial, you have him coming out and being a heel. You never would have seen that in the 80s. You never would have seen heels doing charity work. You never would have seen heels doing all these wonderful things. And because we can't take that out, you can't tell somebody, well, you just turned heel, so sorry, you can't go to see the Make-A-Wish kid. I don't know. I don't know that there's any way to necessarily even try to get back to what that was. You know, people could say, well, Brock Lesnar could be like Undertaker. Nah, not really. I don't know that, like Brock has the heft of being a real life fighter. Brock has the heft that he really could probably beat the crap out of everybody in that locker room. But I don't know that there's an old school wrestler I could say he's a throwback to. I mean, kind of like an anti-Hogan. Because Hogan wrestled like 4 or 5 times a year back then as well. Hogan did not wrestle very often. People who complain about Brock Lesnar, and I've complained plenty, it's easy to forget Hulk Hogan did not work a full schedule. He was not a guy who worked a full schedule. He didn't work the weekly shows on TV. He would work his pay-per-views, and the pay-per-views were like every few months in the beginning. He did do house shows, but I don't think he did all of them. And again, his matches weren't 20, 30-minute matches like some other guys on the card were having. And he just didn't put guys over. So that was a problem. But yeah, I'd be interested to know what you guys think. Because it feels to me like this doesn't come back, and these specials on Dark Side of the Ring are both a reminder of the ugliness, but it also reminds us of when things were pretty darn good with wrestling. So let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.